Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Brownsville Matters. I'm excited today to have a kind of colleague of mine, Dr. Robles. He and I used to work together on the development board when I was at the university in a position as vice president for development, and he was incredibly helpful in making the university the success it is today. And so I'm excited to have him here to talk about Brownsville and its evolution over the time that he's been here, many, many years. Dr. Robles, were you born in Brownsville?
No, Dr. Strong, first of all, thank you for having me on.
Welcome.
Brownsville Matters. And, no, I was born in Raymondville, and as a child, my parents moved back to Brownsville, where my grandmother was from. And so I grew up in Brownsville.
But your family at that time were involved in what enterprises?
Yeah, my grandfather was in the trucking business, and at that time they haul citrus fruit and cotton in the trucks. And then back in the 1950s and early 60s, he became a part of the government program that would he would use the trucks to take the braceros to the north harvest during harvest season.
To Michigan and...
Michigan, Indiana, Oklahoma,
okay.
North, Colorado.
So he would just transport them, or did he manage them?
Well, at the end he would take them up, and then at the end of the harvest season, they would come. They would go and pick them up and bring them back to the border,
okay.
And then they would put them in buses and they would head home into Mexico.
Okay. Do you think that would be a good program today?
I think that would be an excellent program. I think most people don't want to stay here. They want to go back home where their families and friends are, and to be closer to their own culture. They just need to make a little money, do their job during harvest season, and then head back.
Did you work in the fields yourself?
Oh, yes. I myself picked cotton. That was before the combine.
Yeah.
And we were talking about earlier, watermelons and oranges. Then in Indiana, you picked tomatoes. I was working in the tomato fields.
What was the hardest? What was the toughest labor for you?
The broom corn in Oklahoma. The broom corn, they grow in stalks, kind of like corn. At the very top, you just break off the top of the bristles that grow at the top of the stalk, and they would release a pollen and all kinds of things. You have allergies and in the hot sun, and that actually was it taught me to stick it out in school and do something with
to
my
one
own.
more.
Oh yes, it was very, very hard. I used to cry, from the hard labor. And my father was very strict. Everybody would be working. The whole family would be working. The second one was the tomato fields, because that's a low lying job.
You got to stoop all the time.
You're stooping, and that you're picking the tomatoes and putting them in baskets and carrying them loads into the trucks and loading them into trucks and under the hot sun. That was very hard.
So when years later you had a tough time in cardiology school, did you say, well, it's not as hard as doing tomatoes? I can do this.
It's far more satisfying. Saving somebody's life, it's there's no
comparison.
No
right?
comparison.
Did you do you remember how old you were when you seriously said, I want to be a doctor?
Yes, 8 years old.
8 years old?
8 years old.
Wow.
I had a surgery done in my neck. I had a disorder called torticollis, which was one of my neck muscles had a hemorrhage, and then it caused the problem with my neck. And there was a doctor here, Dr. Dudley Smith. Back then, he had his office across the old Brownsville Medical Center. Was Mercy Hospital. And he straightened out my neck after the surgery, and I said that's what I want to do. I want to help people get better. It had a profound impact in my life.
And then you went to school here in Brownsville.
Yeah, I'm a product of the Brownsville Independent School District, and it was at Stell Middle School where I actually joined the band and started playing the cornet. And those are fun times because after Stell, I then went on to Brownsville High School, or Homer Hanna later. And
so you were science and music.
Science and music, yes, yeah, and just had a lot of fun during those years.
And then from there, you went to college.
I went to college, then.
Did you go to college here?
Here
At Southmost?
Yes, no, at Southmost, but then University of Texas, Brownsville.
Okay, UT Brownsville, right?
Yeah.
And then you went on to med school.
And graduated from New York Medical College.
Oh.
I began early on in Mexico, where my mother was from Tampico, and I started school there, medical school, and then transferred to New York Medical College in Valhalla, New York.
Wow, that's quite a culture shock, isn't it, to go from Tampico to New York?
Yeah, it was just an amazing experience, and I never wavered, never looked back, because I said, if you look back, you're going to end up back in the fields.
The tomato fields.
And so I was driven. I was really driven to succeed.
And so how long were you in New York? Is that 3 or 4 years?
6 years.
Oh, 6 years.
Yes.
That included your residency there?
Yeah, I did my internship after I graduated in internal medicine at Mount Sinai Medical Center in New York City.
Well, that's quite a pedigree there.
Yeah.
Mount Sinai is very famous.
Yes, and huge hospitals, and great experience, because rare diseases that one reads about in books, you actually saw the patients, because people from all over the world with rare diseases. And so from there, I moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and where I was accepted to a program in cardiology.
Well, how did you went from internal medicine to cardiology? What made you make that shift?
Well, at the end of your internal medicine training, you can either go into internal medicine, which is general practice,
Right.
or you can apply to get into a specialty. And the main specialties of internal medicine are cardiology, rheumatology, pulmonary diseases, and so on and so forth, and endocrinology. So I decided on cardiology.
Okay.
So I put it in my application, got an interview, and there must have been about 200 applicants. They interviewed 20, and they accepted only 5.
Oh, my goodness.
It was very, very competitive.
I guess so. It's almost like winning the lottery to get in at that rate.
So I guess I felt lucky to have gotten in.
Well, was being bilingual helpful?
It did. Interestingly, Albuquerque, New Mexico is an interesting place because there's 3 cultures there. There's the Native American, there's the Spanish or Mexican American, and the Anglo American. They all live, together, and they all work together, and it's a great experience.
Is there any difference in cardiological fitness in those 3 cultures because of diet or anything? Did you notice anything that you could say, well, this is typical of this ethnicity or whatever?
Yeah, well, the Native Americans have their foods, but then it's mixed with some of the Mexican culture as well, because they also eat a lot of chilies. And so a lot of the
nopales,
nopales and the chilies, and the hatch chilies from New Mexico, which are very tasty. Some of the dishes are just wonderful, and the breads also.
Is that good for the heart, the nopales?
Yeah, I mean, they're low in calories and
low in cholesterol, I assume.
Low in cholesterol, and
You know, I used to live in Arizona, and I remember that there was a study done there among, I'm going to use the old term from the Papago Indians, they were called, but they have a new name now. But anyway, they had what they called cousins in Mexico, genetic cousins, they referred to them as. And the ones in Mexico were very fit and healthy, and those in the States were not so. And they were looking at the difference, and one of the big differences was the ones in Mexico ate a lot of nopales.
Yeah.
And the ones in America were eating the processed foods and stuff.
Yes.
And so the fitness level, cardiological fitness was vastly different between the two based on diet. So that's why I was asking if you saw any of that sort of thing.
No, there not so much nopal, even though nopales come part of the cuisine because it goes back to the time of the Aztecs.
Mm-hmm.
And they used it for many different types of dishes, and it's readily available.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can nourish you. Also, let's not forget that nopal is part of the Mexican flag.
Yes.
And it's very symbolic. You know, they have an eagle standing on nopal.
That's true.
So, and it goes back to the ancient times.
Goes way back.
Yeah.
So how did you get back to Brownsville?
So when I finished the cardiology training, I was then starting to look at jobs where I could potentially go, and I always had my heart set on going back to Texas. Mm-hmm. So I looked at Brownsville, Corpus Christi, and San Antonio, and we really liked San Antonio. Mm-hmm. Really liked the very lively.
It's a great city.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful
fantastic. Lots of things available there for cultural activities. And, but as I was into my last semester of training, I got a phone call from Mrs. Mary Rose Cardenas. At that time, she was on the board of the Valley Regional Hospital. And I believe she was also on the board at Texas Southmost College. Right. And she must have spent 2 hours on the phone with me, trying to convince me to come back to Brownsville because they were in badly need of cardiologists in Brownsville. And so...
What year was this?
1992.
92.
Mm-hmm. So... I then asked her, well, how are we going to start the cardiology program if I'm trained to do very specific and highly technical procedures, and the machines, the technology we use is very expensive. So there's a bit of a pause, and he says, well, how much money you're talking about to get things started at the hospital? Well, I'm guessing right around $2 million. Mm-hmm. He says, no problem. I said, thank God I was sitting down, so I couldn't believe my ears. I said, yeah, so then she said, well, what else? Is there anything else that's keeping you from coming down? If I get you the money, we'll come. I said, well, one other thing is my wife, she had her heart set in San Antonio. She really likes San Antonio. She says, put her on the line. I want to talk to her. So she spoke with Perla, and she said, Perla, you're from Brownsville too, and you all need to move back, and this and that. And yes, Mrs. Garland, I could hear her on the phone. No, Mrs. Garland, yes, Mrs. Garland said, okay, Mrs. Carden. I said, okay, yes, we'll move back to Brownsville. And then 2 hours later, my ear was red, from holding the phone in my ear. It's like, oh my God. But coming back to Brownsville, I had to start a heart program from scratch. Mm-hmm. And that took an enormous amount of
Mm-hmm.
energy, and it was a very stressful time because we had to train the technicians, we had to get the nurses on board. I gave a lot of talk, a lot of lectures to the hospital personnel, and then to get the open heart program started as well, and the angioplasty program. And it was necessary because a lot of people would have a heart attack prior to the program, the cardiology program in Brownsville. A lot of people would end up with a heart attack and then they'd be shipped out either to Houston or Harlingen or McAllen, and they'd die on the way.
Yeah, that's what I said. They wouldn't make it, I bet.
Yeah, or they would have complications at the hospitals, and then families would have to, stay in hotels, and it was very, very hard on families. So that was a part of the reason for me to, do all I could at that time to get the program going.
When I was a kid, back in the 60s, 70s, if someone had a heart attack, we thought of it as a horrible thing, because a lot of people died.
Yeah.
And we thought of it as something that was incredibly compromising, like it's over for them. They've had a heart attack.
Yeah.
And today, people say all the time, they say, well, my uncle had a heart attack, but he's doing fine. He's going to be up and about in a couple of weeks. And it's incredible the difference that has occurred in these 30 years.
Amazing technology.
Is it the drugs and the tech, or getting to it quickly, or
all that? All of those things, because if you're having a heart attack, you need to get to the hospital within 2 hours, and that can make a big
huge difference
in saving someone's life.
And then what drugs have been invented in the past 30 years that have given us advantages that they didn't have in the 50s and 60s?
Yeah, the main one was what we call thrombolytic therapy, and part of the mechanism of a heart attack is the formation of a blood clot in a coronary artery, which stops the blood flow through the artery. And the thrombolytics were designed to, if you're having a heart attack and you look at the EKGs and make that diagnosis, and then you give the thrombolytic therapy, which dissolves the clot, and thereby reestablishing blood flow. That was the first thing that came about with the therapy for someone having a heart attack.
So the heart muscle wouldn't be damaged in the way that it had been earlier.
Right. So the golden hour, we call it the golden hour. If you can get to a hospital within the hour of the onset of a heart attack, then you can save a lot of heart muscle. So as the longer you wait, especially if you wait more than 2 hours, then there's a point of no return, particularly at 4 hours. If the heart attack started 4 hours and then finally you make a decision to go to the hospital, even if you reestablish blood flow, the damage is done. That area of the heart where the artery runs through becomes scarred and non-functional. And so then you develop a different kind of problem, which is congestive heart failure.
That's good. Hang on a second. So I can hear the cough over here, so you want to stop a minute and have some water or something?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So
we're still recording.
What's that?
I'm leaving the recording.
You can leave it go?
Yeah.
Okay. So that happens sometimes. He has a cough that comes along, but anyway, I'm always very fascinated by this because I don't know if I ever told you, but back when I was a young man in my 30s, I worked for Wyeth Labs in cardiology, in the cardiology division, and in Arizona.
Oh, wow.
And so I learned a lot about cardiology just from the drug perspective, and always had a great fascination with it. But the drug that I didn't really deal with much, it was one, I didn't detail it much, even though it was part of my pharmacopoeia, was amiodarone. And there were a lot of doctors there in Arizona who used the hell out of it because there was an older population, congestive heart failure and everything. But I made a lot of money off of it, but I never actually dealt it much because the people who used it they knew more about it than I did. You know, they were in the hospital. Generally, they're in Tucson and Phoenix in those teaching hospitals. So,
amiodarone is mainly used today for atrial fibrillation and ventricular tachycardia for arrhythmias of the heart, and it's a great drug. It does have some important side effects, but a lot of times the benefit outweighs the risk of using the drug. But we still use it on a regular basis today.
Have you witnessed the what they call the Smurf syndrome, where it turns people blue?
Yes, I've seen it. Yeah, the blue sclera. The white of your eyes turn blue, and also your skin turns blue. I've seen a couple of cases over the.
Does it have a greater effect on, say, people like me with fair skin, or does it affect everybody?
Well, the interesting thing is that the case that I saw was an Anglo person that developed it, but mainly because of the color, you were able to see
right.
that they were changing in color. But those are rare side effects. The more common ones are pulmonary toxicity and thyroid toxicity, occasionally liver toxicity as well. So you've got to be checking the patients on a regular basis.
What can you do in Brownsville in terms of procedures that you couldn't do in 1992? Do you do actual atrial septal defect repair, that sort of thing? Do you do that sort of surgery or procedure?
The most common procedure, other than the thrombolytics, was coronary stenting. And so that was developed in the 1970s by Andreas Grunzik. And he is the one that got the idea of putting in a coil inside the coronary artery where it was blocked with cholesterol plaque. So just imagine a coronary artery is like a miniature garden hose, or let's say a pen. A pen, if you take apart a pen and then you look inside, it's hollow, and if you put it back together, well, there's a spring inside. That, and it's cylindrical, so it takes the shape of the inside of the pen. So that's what we call a stent, that coil. So what we do is we inject contrast into the coronary, and on a screen you can actually see the narrowing of the valve of the coronary. And so you put a wire inside the coronary artery, and then you thread the coil, the stent, and you secure it at the spot where the artery is narrowed. And then that coil, that stent, is wrapped around a balloon. And so that when you inflate the balloon, it expands the stent, and then you deflate the balloon, and then the stent stays up and acts like a scaffold. It keeps the artery from collapsing, and it actually takes the shape of the inside of the artery. So once you deflate the balloon and you take the balloon out, then you restore blood flow through the coronary artery. So that's the most common procedures that we do here in Brownsville and throughout the U.S. Yeah.
Well, do you do those, for what they used to call the hole in the heart? Do you do they call it a butterfly flap or something that they put over that?
Right, and so it's an umbrella.
You do that here too?
No. Those are rare procedures. They're called atrial septal defects. And there's a wall between the left upper and the right upper chamber. And that wall sometimes has a hole in it. And so venous blood is mixed with arterial blood, and that's not a good thing, because patients eventually die at a young age from that. So, but creating this clamshell device that you can thread through a vein in your leg and then up into the hole, and then you deploy this umbrella-shaped device. It looks like a clamshell, and then you just screw it in, and it covers the entire hole, and then you unscrew the device from the clamshell and just leave it there, and without having to do open heart surgery, you can fix this.
So it's
problem.
done by catheterization, essentially. They
Right.
just slip it up in there, and with the procedure is what, a couple hours, or,
It takes a couple of
2
hours,
hours,
yes, more or less.
but as
Yeah.
opposed to the old style where they actually cut the sternum open, and
Yeah,
it was
that was pretty drastic.
pretty wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, with when you were about town here in Brownsville, and you see our culture and how we eat and everything, and as a cardiologist, what disturbs you? When you say, "I wish people wouldn't do this"?
Yeah, interestingly, as a young person walking around the streets of Brownsville, I hardly ever saw any obesity, any obese people. But coming back, I was shocked at the number of people that were way overweight. But at the same time, I think it has a lot to do with the proliferation of fast food restaurants. Back then, in the 1960s, there was, if I recall, the Whataburger was like the only one at that time, and there was a drive-in. And
Everybody ate at home.
Everybody at home. Fresh produce, fresh, everything was fresh. And go to the market, buy your things, and cook at home. And people would walk everywhere also.
Yeah.
And so the lack of exercise, people now, you have to get in your car, you have to drive to the grocery store. And although the big grocery chains, like the Walmarts, for example, have forced the closure of a lot of the mom and pop stores. And so now, they are, you have to go to them. So you have to get in a car and drive to the grocery store.
So it's harder to get Whole Foods and now, because it used to these little tiendas, they had a lot of fresh Whole Foods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So diet is one, and the proliferation of fast foods. I don't know if I should say this, but I mean, in Boca Chica, if you drive down Boca Chica, there are at least 6 chicken places.
Oh yeah.
They're
6 everywhere.
6 or 7 chicken places, and so and it's very high in calories, and so you couple that with a lack of exercise, then you got trouble.
You got trouble.
And you're gonna have trouble with the development of diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease, and all of them can cut your life short.
Do you see in your practice? Do you see heart problems in younger and younger people these days?
Yes, yes. A lot of obesity patients that have young people have diabetes and hypertension. You never saw that, in the years prior to the obesity. I would say an epidemic.
And when you tell a patient, when you say, listen, you got to get your diet under control, you got to lose weight, you got to get some exercise, how often does that work?
It's difficult because people have to get motivated. You have to get them motivated to do so, and in fact, you have to teach them how to eat. And so, I was part of a program that was set up by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in San Diego, and I brought that idea back here to Brownsville, and where the diet that they recommend, and there's only one diet. There's so many diets out there, it confuses the public, but they're only diet that is clinically proven to work is a Mediterranean-style diet. So they teach us to teach the patients that if you take a 9-inch plate and you cut it in half, the top portion of the plate should be fruits and vegetables. Then the bottom half, you cut it in half again. So 1/4 should be lean meats and seafood, and the other should be whole grains. That and drinking water. We don't drink enough water. The population out there doesn't drink enough water. So that's the diet. So.
Well, you remember, speaking of drinking water, I was telling my kids, I said, it used to be that when I went to a restaurant when I was a teenager, they put water in front of you first thing. They gave you a glass of water, ice water. They put it down. It was free. Every place you would eat, the water comes first. And now that doesn't happen. You get your tea, your Coke, or whatever, but most likely Coke, and or a soft drink of some sort, or a beer. But you don't get that glass of water that came with every meal that you had. Plus the eating out. I remember, and I'm sure it's true for you too, as a kid, eating out was rare. That was like a rare treat. Maybe once a month we would go eat out, but everything else was home. And it was kind of whole foods. I mean, maybe kind of carb heavy. I remember eating lots of potatoes in my family. Typical gringo diet of meat and potatoes, but still at home, fresh vegetables a lot, salad with most meals, etc. So I think you're right. I think the fast food. In fact, I was hearing a cardiologist talk on YouTube the other day, and she was talking about with her years of cardiology, and same as you, she said, here's 5 things that I would never do. And I would never eat at fast food restaurants except once in a great while as a treat. I would never spend a day without exercise, getting out and getting my heart pumping, things like that. So these are some of the things that she talked about. Plus, she said she would never, and you've covered all of these, she would never wait and see if she was feeling, like she was having a cardiac event. She wouldn't wait and see how it works out.
Yeah. And the other important point that they made in this program with the Center for Disease Control and Prevention was that of exercise. So the recommendation is to walk or exercise for 30 minutes 5 days out of the week. Minimum. And maximum 1 hour a day. So a lot of people don't follow that advice, and so the way you get around that is to pin them down and tell them and advise them that they have to sit down and create a schedule for themselves. And that's a time for themselves, because people are busy working or taking care of family members and whatnot. But then you have to carve out time for yourself so that you can have a long and healthy life. So staying active is of critical importance in a healthy lifestyle.
Now, an interesting thing about you, I think, in my experience, people in medicine that I've known in my life, a tremendous number of them have a simultaneous interest in science and in the arts, particularly music. And you played the trumpet, and you're a cardiologist, so you're science and art. So how do these two go together? These two passions?
Yeah, it's interesting in that playing music requires a discipline. And that means you have to practice and you have to read, and like you say, practice makes perfect. So it creates that discipline. The other thing is that you have to work with others. So if you're in a band or in an orchestra, then you have to work with other people in order to create a piece of music. And so then the band director then is responsible for making sure that everybody's doing their part. So it all comes together, and then we create music, which is, I think, a wonderful experience for any young person. So it's that discipline that says, all right, you have to sit down and you have to practice for hours. And so the ability of sitting there and concentrating for hours on end is important. I say anywhere from 2 to 4 hours of practice. So if you then create, if you go into the sciences, you have to actually sit there for hours at a time and read and try to understand complex problems that require thinking, and there's a method to it. So I think that's perhaps how those two are married, science and music.
And you've been a great promoter of music here through the Brownsville Society for the Performing Arts. Now, tell us how that got started.
Well, being a product of school district here in Brownsville, I was exposed to lots of different music in my lifetime. I have been exposed to lots of different music. And being from South Texas and growing up here with my family, listening to conjunto music and norteño music, mariachi music, but not only that, but that's because we're close to Mexico and the culture, but also growing up as a teenager in Brownsville, listening to the radio, pop music, American Bandstand, and a lot of the different on TV, and then and so growing up with a mixture,
Freddie Fender, I'm sure.
Freddie Fender and Texas Tornadoes, and country music. So many different genres of music that I was exposed to at a very young age. And but it was not until I was in college when I first heard jazz. It was introduced to by a professor of mine, Dr. Melvin Miranda. He was a professor of cultural anthropology, and he put on Dave Brubeck, some Dave Brubeck music, and I remember it was Take Five. I was amazed at the rhythm and the sound. It was just fantastic. It was very, we used to call it groovy. And
when you're in the operating room, do you listen to jazz? I know a lot of doctors have special music they like when they're doing procedures.
Yeah, I actually like classical music.
Classical music, okay.
But soft and quiet, very meditative type of sound.
So the Brownsville Society for the Performing Arts that you helped to found, what is its purpose?
Well, to bring joy and happiness to the people of Brownsville, so that hopefully they could feel what I felt when I first got exposed to the different kinds of music out there. So when living in New York, I got to go to Carnegie Hall, to concerts there, Lincoln Center,
how wonderful.
Opera. And so I would, I came back with just full of ideas of what makes a community healthy, I'd say, and happy, and seeing people from all walks of life, and children, grandmas, mom and dads, and friends, enjoying going to concerts. That was a very joyful experience for me. I said, well, why can't we do that in Brownsville? And so when I came back in 1992, I noticed that McAllen had the Valley Symphony Orchestra, and I thought, well, we need to get an organization going, but I think that it cannot be just classical music. We need to come up with a plan in which it encompasses everything, from dance to jazz to flamenco to just
Oh, you're right.
They've been generous.
If you want to inspire the younger generation to this, you have to include multiple genres.
Yeah, so it was at the house of Dr. Jorge Dominguez, who is a local pediatrician here. Still has his office out there on International. And he and his wife had friends from Guatemala that the man played the violin and the wife played the cello. Mm-hmm. And they came to Brownsville to visit and stay with them. And so they put together an evening concert. And I still recall that night, I invited Claire Burkott, my CPA. She was working with Burton McCumber and Cortez.
Yes.
And she came along with me and her guest, and a lot of doctors were invited that evening at Dr. Dominguez's house. He actually lives right there on Palm Boulevard, at the old Camille Leitner home. Oh. And so they played that evening, and I was amazed. I said, man, I feel like I'm back in New York or some big city, enjoying this beautiful music right here in Brownsville. And so after the concert, we're sitting there in the living room talking about the possibilities, and it just a light bulb went up, and I said, hey, why don't we form a some kind of organization that promotes music here? Mm-hmm. But I said, let's not make it so narrow that that's the only kind
Good
of music.
Good idea. Yeah, that's brilliant.
So they came up with the name, and I don't recall if it was me or one of the other people there that we said, why don't we call it the Brownsville Society for the Performing Arts? And that way, if we want to bring jazz, well, let's bring jazz. If we want to bring flamenco, we want to bring world music, which we did over the years, or classical music, quartets, all these things. We're not limited to only one kind of music. And so we formed the organization. The people that actually formed the Brownsville Society for Performing Arts was Claire Burkott, CPA. She helped put the application through. It was 501c3 of the state of Texas. And myself, Dr. Carlos Chavez, a cardiovascular surgeon. He has since passed away he passed away this year in Lima, Peru. Dr. Jorge Dominguez and David Nunez, who's a oral maxillofacial surgeon in Harlingen. Also a big aficionado of music. And so it was that group then that formed. So Dr. Chavez was the first president, and Claire was the treasurer, and I was the vice president, and then there was Dr. Dominguez and David Nunez. Then the next person that became the president was Dr. Jorge Dominguez, and then after Jorge Dominguez, during that time, Dr. Langen, who was a family doctor here in Brownsville, introduced us to a newcomer to Brownsville. His name was George Ramirez. Oh. And George Ramirez came in, was real excited because he talked about his tío, Romulo, in Mexico City, that used to have a huge collection of classical music and opera music in Mexico City. And he had his own radio station, Radio Hour, at Palacio de Bellas Artes. They had a radio hour at that time, and so
down in Mexico.
In Mexico City,
wow.
DF, and so he talked to us about how much he had grown up with all that type of music, and at that time, after leaving Mexico City, he moved to Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, from there, he moved to Brownsville and started his company here, Polybrit. And then after Jorge Dominguez stepped down, then George became the president.
And then he created this radio station that we're on right now.
He took it to another level. His brainchild was that of the Latin Jazz Fest. He was passionate about that. And then the radio station there was an opportunity that we couldn't leave behind. And then Ben Nees then started the Flamenco Festival. Again, all this just flourishing, all this different kinds of genres of music, and we also had dance and support a lot of people, young people in dance. And then Dr. Michael Quantz with his guitar festival came along, and so it's just taken a life of its own, which is, I think, is the beauty of it.
What big event do you have coming up in the next year or so that you're looking forward to?
Well, the Latin Jazz Festival, we want to keep that
going.
Yeah, going.
Quans has his guitar festival every year,
festival,
which is
yes.
always phenomenal.
Yes, and so we've had some fantastic acts come to Brownsville, and I believe it was Dr. Quantz that contacted the Romeros, from San Diego. They're originally from Spain, but they live in San Diego, and they came and played here in Brownsville, and that was a fantastic concert. We've had the Moscow Chamber Orchestra. Konstantin Orbelian is actually an Russian American, but it was the first to lead a Russian orchestra, and came to Brownsville. We had the St. Petersburg String Quartet. That was an interesting concert, because we didn't have a venue.
You've gotten some big names here.
Yeah, we didn't have a venue, and we wanted to go big, and so somebody had the idea to go to St. Luke's Church and asked the priest if we could use it for the concert, and right away he said yes, of course, and so the church was filled to capacity, and that evening it's funny because an interesting thing happened that evening, that we lit a lot of candles throughout the church, and including the altar. And so the St. Petersburg String Quartet came in, and this young lady was playing the violin, and she had long hair.
Uh-oh.
Like Rapunzel, I would say. And so she was swinging her head back and forth, and she must have put a lot of spray in her hair, and so she went and she swung her the tail of her hair went over one of the candles, and it lit on fire. So she was on fire, and one of the other musicians went up to her and put out the fire. The interesting thing is that she never skipped a note. And everybody was just laughing, and but they had a great time here in Brownsville.
Well, that's a memorable vision right there.
Yeah.
Well, if you got to catch on fire, it's good to do it in front of a room of doctors, I suppose.
It was, yeah. Well, fortunately, nothing happened to her. And, it was fire.
So, how do we keep up with what's coming? Is there a website or something that we can visit regularly?
Yes.
Is it the Brownsville Society of Performing Arts?
I'm very. I think that we're very fortunate to have somebody like Dr. Michael Quantz to take the helm of the BSBA,
Right.
and particularly after the unfortunate loss of George Ramirez. But he has taken it to another level and getting organized. We recently hired Gabriel here at the station to help coordinate all these programs and keep it going. And I think that is my hope, is that BSBA doesn't die on the vine, that we could keep supporting it, because it's real important, both the radio station plus the festivals and things that we put together for the general public.
Well, I'm so glad that Mary Rose called you, because not only did you fill an enormous vacuum in terms of health opportunity in cardiology that wasn't here before. Vital need. No doubt there are many people alive today because you're here.
Yeah.
And then the other thing about building a great city is you've got to have availability of the arts and a place for artists to follow their passion and their dreams. I've spent a lot of time in Europe, and I've always marveled at two things there in their great cities. One is the great parks, that they have these enormous parks that have existed for 200 years, and they've held them sacrosanct, and nothing can encroach upon them.
Yeah.
It's sacred land for the people, and like Central Park in New York.
Right.
And so we have some of that here. We have some of these parks, but they also have a great investment in the arts. So you can go anywhere, and on any given night, you can see great theater, you can see great music. And so you've given us that opportunity here in Brownsville, and like you say, we hope it grows. We hope it becomes a more common thing than it is even today. So, Dr. Robles, thank you for coming in.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Dr. Strong,
Appreciate it.
thank you, and thank you, Gabriel.